In the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council, the tension was unbearable. It felt as if the air itself was thick with anticipation. Delegates from across the galaxy sat in silence, waiting for the next phase of the most crucial meeting in a century. All eyes were on Earth, the newest and most controversial member of the galactic community. But today, Earth's representatives were going to speak. Not just as another species trying to survive in this vast galaxy, but as a species that refused to bow to the will of anyone, no matter how powerful they were. The room was massive, with walls made of gleaming silver that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. The seats were arranged in a perfect circle, each occupied by beings from races more advanced than anything humanity could dream of. Some of these beings were humanoid like the peaceful Zohar, while others were as strange as the galaxy itself, with twisting shapes and forms that defied the imagination. Each representative was surrounded by their own personal entourage of assistants and bodyguards, all silent but ever watchful. At the center of the room stood a large oval table at which the Earth delegation sat. The Earth's envoy was led by Kim Jun-seok, a seasoned diplomat who had seen his fair share of tense negotiations. His dark eyes held the weight of countless sleepless nights, preparing for this very moment. His hands shook slightly, but only because of the immense pressure that was building up inside of him. He had always been proud of humanity's resilience, but today he was about to test it in front of beings far more powerful than anything Earth had ever known. Beside him sat Lee Hijin, an experienced negotiator from the Zohari race. She had worked for years to maintain peace in the galaxy, and she had a sharp mind that had earned her respect even from the most aggressive of species. Her dark skin and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Jun-seok's more anxious presence, but beneath her cool exterior, she understood the gravity of what was about to happen. The meeting had begun like any other. The council members took their seats with dignified poise and began discussing the current state of affairs in the galaxy. Various disputes had risen over the years, especially with the rapid expansion of human influence. Humanity's rise had been fast and unpredictable, and the more powerful races were growing nervous. Some saw humanity as a threat, some as an opportunity, but no one was certain how they would behave on a galactic scale. Gun-seok could feel the weight of their gazes on him as he adjusted his position in his seat. The time for his speech was nearing, and his mind raced. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, but now that it was finally here, he was unsure if he could convey what needed to be said. Would the galaxy understand, or would they see Earth as nothing more than an inconvenience that needed to be eliminated? The debate had become heated, with the Zohari representative arguing that Earth should be guided into a peaceful alliance with the more established races. The Zalera delegate, an imposing being with 4 arms and shimmering blue skin, spoke loudly of the importance of maintaining order and unity within the galaxy. The leader of the Emberic species, a race of energy beings, had even hinted that Earth's unpredictable nature could eventually destabilize the entire region. But humans had had enough of these talks. The message was clear. Earth would no longer be controlled or dictated to Junes. Eok had been chosen to deliver that message on behalf of all of humanity. He stood up slowly, his heart racing in his chest. Every eye in the room turned toward him as he cleared his throat. His hands were shaking now, but he didn't allow himself to falter. Now this was his moment. "My name is Kim Jun-seok, and I represent the people of Earth," he began, his voice steady but loud enough to carry through the massive chamber. "I stand before you today, not just as a representative of my planet, but as a representative of every human who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they would ever be free." There was a murmur among the council members, but Jun-seok pressed on. "For years we have been trying to join this galactic community in peace, but every time we extend a hand in friendship, it is met with suspicion and disdain. We have been told that we are too young, too inexperienced to stand alongside you, that we must bend to your will, that we must accept your terms and follow your orders, but humanity refuses to do so." The room went quiet as the full impact of his words sank in. "We are not here to beg for your approval or to plead for your forgiveness. We are here because we have earned our place among the stars. We are not your children. We are not your subjects. We are your equals, and we will be treated as such from this day forward." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Hai-Jin looked. Taken aback at the raw emotion in Jun Seok's words, he could feel the weight of every human on Earth standing behind him. His voice grew stronger as he continued. We may not have the ancient history of some of you, we may not have the advanced technology of others, but we have something that none of you can ever take from us. We have the spirit of survival and the will to fight for our freedom. We will not bow, we will not surrender, we will not compromise our values to appease those who seek to control us. His eyes swept across the room, and he could see the confusion, the doubt, the concern on the faces of the delegates. It was clear that no one had expected this response from humanity. They had expected Earth to comply to submit to the will of the Council, but Jun Seok had made it clear that Earth would never do that. The Zohari delegate Hai-Jin stood up as well, her voice calm but filled with urgency. Jun Seok, you cannot simply defy the Council. You must understand the risks of refusing diplomacy. You risk the very existence of your people. Jun Seok met her gaze and shook his head slowly. We understand the risks better than anyone. You speak of peace and cooperation, but we have seen what happens when we bow to the demands of others. We have seen the destruction that follows when the strong seek to impose their will on the weak. Humanity has survived countless trials, and we will continue to survive. But we will do so on our terms, not on anyone else's. Hai-Jin's eyes softened just for a moment, but the Council as a whole was far from convinced. The tension in the room thickened as the delegates began to speak among themselves. Some whispered in their native tongues, others made gestures of disbelief, but Jun Seok remained calm, standing firm in his resolve. He had known this would happen. He had known that Earth's refusal to submit would shock the galaxy. But this was the only way forward. There was no turning back now. The minutes felt like hours as the debate continued. The Council members exchanged heated words and exchanged glances of confusion and doubt.
Ow.
Jun Seok remained standing, waiting for their response, knowing that whatever came next would shape the future of humanity after what felt like an eternity. The Council's presiding leader, a being called Yareth, spoke. His voice was deep and reverberated through the room like the sound of a distant thunderstorm. You speak of independence and freedom, but you must understand the consequences of your actions. Yareth said, his eyes glowing faintly with the light of distant stars. We are not asking you to surrender your autonomy. We are asking you to cooperate for the greater good of the galaxy, for the survival of all who call this galaxy home. Jun Seok looked Yareth in the eye. We do not need your protection, nor your guidance, he said, his voice unwavering. We will forge our own path. We will create our own alliances with those who respect our autonomy, not those who seek to control us. Yareth's expression darkened, but he said nothing. The silence that followed was oppressive, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Jun Seok turned to face the rest of the Council. His voice was calm but firm as he made his final declaration. Humanity refuses diplomacy because we refuse to be controlled by anyone. We will stand as equals or we will stand alone, but we will not kneel before any force, no matter how powerful. He stepped back from the table and sat down, feeling the weight of the room's gaze upon him. He had said what needed to be said. The rest was out of his hands. Meeting continued, but the damage had been done. The Council was left stunned by Earth's bold refusal to submit to their will. The galaxy would never be the same again. The seeds of change had been planted, and there was no turning back for Jun Seok and humanity. It was a victory of sorts, but it was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but one thing was certain: Earth would not be a passive observer in the galaxy any longer. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now they would see what that would mean. The story of Earth's defiance had only just begun. The days after the meeting were tense and uncertain. A quiet unease spread across the world as people on Earth waited to see what the reaction would be from the galactic community. Some were fearful that the refusal to comply with the Galactic Council's demands would bring war. Others felt a sense of pride for standing up to forces far more powerful than humanity had ever faced. As Jun Seok walked through the streets of Seoul, the weight of his decision hung heavily on his shoulders, but there was something else in the air, something that had not been there before, a feeling of unity, feeling that humanity might just have a chance to stand tall in a galaxy that had long ignored its existence. It had been 3 days since his speech, and already the news was filled with debates. Political leaders spoke on their positions with conflicting messages. Some argued that the refusal was a brave stance, while others worried that it would lead to humanity's downfall. People from all corners of Earth reacted with mixed emotions, but one thing was certain. The world was waking up to the reality that they were no longer a passive species. The Earth no longer looked like a small corner of the universe. It looked like a place that might fight for its right to exist. Jun-Suk was quiet as he walked through the crowded streets. The noise of the city buzzing around him, people went about their daily routines, unaware of the incredible shift that had just occurred, but there were eyes on him wherever he went. People recognized him now. It wasn't just the government or the military. Even ordinary citizens seemed to know who he was. His speech had made waves far beyond the council's chambers, and as he passed a group of young students talking excitedly about the galactic situation, he overheard their conversation. "Did you hear what Jun-Suk said? He said we don't have to bow down anymore," one of the students said excitedly. As they passed by, "We have our own place in the stars now." The words hit Jun-Seok like a wave of relief. He didn't realize how much he needed to hear that it wasn't just the politicians and diplomats who were listening. It was everyone. It was humanity that had begun to believe that maybe they could hold their own in the galaxy. Maybe they didn't have to be afraid back in the capital. The government convened to discuss the next steps. The room was filled with tense faces, some anxious, others quietly hopeful. Jun-Seok sat in a chair before them, listening as they debated the next move. Should Earth try to form alliances with other races? Should they prepare for war, or should they attempt to reach out to the Galactic Council once again and try to repair the damage that had been done? His words were still echoing in the room. You could see it on the faces of the other leaders. They were all thinking about what this meant for humanity's future. Park Yoonji, one of the top advisors to the government, stood and addressed the room with a calm but firm voice. "We cannot go back to the old way of doing things. We cannot bow to the Council's demands. We must take a stand for ourselves. For the first time in history, we have an opportunity to make our own decisions without being dictated to by others." Yeonji's words resonated with Jun-Seok. He had been speaking the same truth for so long, but hearing someone else say it in such clear terms made him feel like they were finally on the same page, finally united in the belief that humanity's fate would not be controlled by the wishes of others. The debate continued, but the tension had shifted. There was no more fear in the room, only determination. As the days turned into weeks, humanity's stance was felt across the galaxy. In the halls of the Galactic Council, whispers began to spread about Earth's bold refusal. Some races considered it a dangerous move, while others began to question if they had misjudged humanity all along. The Zohari representative Haijin was one of the few who spoke in defense of Earth's decision. She had spent years working as a negotiator, and she knew that what had happened was not just a matter of politics. It was something deeper, something about the very core of what it meant to be human. Hajin's voice had been calm during the meetings, but now in private she was speaking out about the strength of the human spirit. She had seen it before: the relentless determination to survive against impossible odds, and she knew that humanity had something that the galaxy had never truly understood. Until now, in the days that followed, Haijin had been asked by the Council to meet with the Earth's delegation again, to try and understand the reasoning behind Jun-Suk's speech. It was clear that the refusal had shaken things up in ways the Council hadn't anticipated. They wanted to know more. They wanted to know why humanity would risk everything for independency. Jin arrived in Seoul a week after the speech to speak with Jun-Seok. Face to face, she found him in a quiet cafe on a corner of the city, surrounded by a small group of government officials and advisors. As she approached, she could see the weariness in his eyes, but there was something else too, something that had been missing before. It was a quiet confidence, a belief in himself and his people that had not been there before. Jun-Seok greeted her with a nod and invited her to sit. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said with a faint smile. "I thought you would be back in the council chambers arguing for our immediate submission." Haijin smiled slightly. "You misunderstand me, Jun-Seok. I didn't come here to argue with you. I came because I want to understand what led to your decision. Why did you take such a risk? Why did you refuse diplomacy?" Jun-Seok leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment before responding because we were never given a choice before. The galaxy has always treated us like we were nothing, like we were just a small corner of the universe to be controlled and manipulated. I couldn't stand by and let that continue. We had to stand up for ourselves, not just for Earth, but for all. The species who've been pushed around by the Council, Hygiene, nodded slowly. She had always respected Jun Seok's resolve, but now, hearing his reasoning, she understood something deeper. He wasn't just speaking for Earth, he was speaking for every race that had ever been ignored or dismissed by the powerful forces in the galaxy. His words had touched something that was raw and real inside of her. "I see," she said quietly, "you've chosen the path of defiance, but it is not without consequence. You realize the risks, don't you? You cannot simply take your place among the stars without facing the consequences of that decision." Jun Seok met her gaze. "I know the risks better than anyone, but what other choice do we have? We can't go back to the way things were. We can't live in fear anymore. We have to make our own future." Hyjin was quiet for a long time. It was clear that she was torn between her duty to the Council and her respect for humanity's courage. But in the end, she knew that Jun Seok was right. There was no going back now. The galaxy had been shaken, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the conversation continued, the two of them found common ground in their understanding of each other's. People the Zohari had always valued peace and cooperation, but even they knew that there were times when peace could not come through submission. There were times when standing up and fighting for what was right was the only path forward. When the meeting ended, Hyjin left with a newfound respect for humanity. She still believed in the importance of diplomacy and cooperation, but she had seen firsthand the strength of the human will, and she knew that Earth was not a species that could be easily controlled. As she walked away from the cafe, she knew that the future of the galaxy was now uncertain, but she also knew that whatever came next, humanity would face it with strength and determination. Back on Earth, the mood was shifting. There was no turning back. The decision had been made. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy would have to listen. The government began to prepare for whatever might come next. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity could stand on its own against the vast and powerful forces of the galaxy. The people were ready to fight if necessary. But they were also ready to negotiate. They were ready to be heard, ready to be seen as equals, ready to take their place among the stars on their own terms. And as Jun Seok stood looking out over the city, once more he felt a deep sense of pride in the people he represented. He had taken a stand, and the galaxy had heard him now. It was time for humanity to decide what kind of future they would create, not just for themselves, but for the generations to come. Road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had found its voice, and nothing would silence it again. In the weeks that followed, the tension around Earth seemed to grow sharper. Everyday news came from the Galactic Council that military forces were being deployed. The Council's response had been swift and decisive. The once quiet debates and murmurs of unrest were now manifesting into real action. Plans were being made to contain the human problem. Whatever that meant, the galaxy's most powerful races couldn't afford to allow a species like humanity to defy the established order. And so they began to prepare for the worst. Earth had declared its independence, but the galaxy wasn't ready to let go of its control. Jun Seok stood in the briefing room, staring out at the city of Seoul. His mind was heavy with the weight of what was coming. He'd expected backlash, but not like this. Earth was now a target. The military was on high alert, preparing for any possible attacks from outside. Their atmosphere, his heart ached with the thought of what this could mean for the millions of people who live their lives unaware of the struggles that were taking place in the stars. The ordinary citizens had no idea that their home was about to be thrust into a war they didn't even know how to fight against. He wondered if they were ready for this kind of conflict, or if they would be caught in the crossfire of powers far beyond their comprehension. Across the room, Park Yoonji was reviewing the latest intelligence reports on the Zohari's movements. Her sharp eyes flicked across the screen as she examined the details. Her expression was tense, but she hid it well. She had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to prepare for the worst, but even she had not expected the Council to respond with such force. It was clear that the Galactic Council was making an example of Earth to show the rest of the galaxy that defiance would not be tolerated. Yunji had always believed in diplomacy, but she now found herself questioning if the peaceful approach was enough. Would the galaxy ever accept humanity as an equal, or would Earth continue to be treated like an insignificant speck on the map? Jun Seok turned to face her Yonji. What's the word from the front lines? She didn't look up from the screen, but spoke in a calm, steady voice. The Zohari have mobilized their forces and are preparing to set up a blockade around Earth. They're waiting for orders from the Council to make the first move. The other races are also moving into position. Jun Seok felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the situation was escalating fast, and there was no going back. The Council had made its decision. They were going to try to force humanity back into submission or face consequences that they had never imagined. As the days passed, Jun Seok couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He knew that the rest of the galaxy was watching Earth closely. The people of Earth were being tested in ways they had never been before, and he wasn't sure if they were ready for what was coming. He had seen their bravery, their strength, and their will to survive. But he also knew that strength alone wasn't always enough. It was one thing to stand up to threats, it was another to be able to hold your ground. Once the battle had begun, the military side preparations were moving forward as well. The Earth defense forces had been bolstered with new weapons and technology, but they were still far behind the advanced species that surrounded them. They had human ingenuity, but that was no match for the sheer firepower of the Zohari fleet. Still, the people of Earth were determined to stand their ground. Their defiance had given them a sense of pride that had never existed before. They weren't going to back down. They weren't going to let anyone push them into submission. And if that meant fighting for their freedom, then so be. Jun Seok spent the next few days meeting with military commanders and strategists, trying to devise a plan. For defense, he knew that Earth wasn't ready for war, but they had no choice. They would have to fight, and they would have to fight hard. The idea of people dying in a war that they didn't start weighed heavily on his heart, but he couldn't afford to back down. Not now, not after everything humanity had worked for. The stakes were higher than ever, and Jun Seok could only hope that they had enough courage to face whatever was coming. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from the Umbaric representative Yareth, the leader of the council. The message was clear and simple: surrender or face annihilation. The words echoed in Jun Seok's mind as he read them over and over. His first instinct was anger, but then came a deeper realization. The galaxy had made its decision. The council wasn't just trying to bring humanity to its knees, they were willing to destroy Earth if necessary, and suddenly everything seemed much more real than it had been before. Jun Seok felt his heart race as he prepared to address the nation. He knew that the message from the council would be the final straw for many people. The choice was clear: Earth would either bow to the council, or it would face a fight for its survival. There was no middle ground. Standing in front of the gathering of leaders, military officials, and media representatives, Jun Seok looked out at the crowd. His mind raced with all the possible outcomes of what he was about to say. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew that humanity had already made its choice. They weren't going to be anyone's pawns anymore. They had made their stand, and if they were going to fall, it would be with their heads held high. My fellow citizens of Earth. He began, his voice strong, but filled with an emotion that could not be hidden. The time has come for us to face the truth. The Galactic Council has issued an ultimatum. They demand our surrender, or they will bring their full force against us. We are standing at the crossroads of history, and the path ahead is uncertain. But there is one thing that I know for sure: we will not bow to them. We will not surrender our freedom. We will not let them erase our humanity. The room fell silent. As Jun Seok's words hit home, the gravity of the situation was clear to everyone in that room. But even as he spoke the words, a small part of him wondered if he was asking too much of the people. Maybe they weren't ready for this. Maybe they didn't understand the cost of defying the galaxy. But the response was immediate. People around the world began to rally behind him. Protests filled the streets. Flags were raised in every city and towns that had never seen demonstrations before. Now echoed with the voices of the people, demanding their right to stand on equal footing with the rest of the galaxy. It was as if humanity had woken up from a long sleep and realized they had the power to change their own fate. They would not allow themselves to be bullied anymore. they would stand and fight no matter the costs. The military prepared for the worst. The first signs of conflict began to emerge. A Zohari fleet had moved into position and began to engage. Defenses. The initial skirmishes were brief, but they sent a strong message to Earth's leaders. The Zohari were not just testing Earth's resolve, they were sending a warning. The battle for Earth's future had begun. Jun Seok watched the news. As the first battle unfolded, the Zohari ships were massive compared to Earth's defenses, but the Earth fleet was determined. They fought with everything they had, even though they were outgunned. The sight of human ships fighting for their survival filled Jun Seok with a strange mix of pride and fear. He knew that this wasn't just about winning battles. This was about something bigger. This was about proving that humanity could survive the impossible, that they could stand against the greatest forces in the galaxy and come out victorious. As the days turned into weeks, the conflict escalated. Earth's military forces continued to hold their ground, but the Zohari were relentless. The Earth defenses were pushed to their limits, and still they fought. The world watched in awe as the humans fought with everything they had. The determination was there, the courage was there, but would it be enough? At the same time, whispers began to circulate among the council members. Some of them had begun to question the wisdom of destroying Earth. Some of them began to wonder if they had underestimated humanity, if they had misjudged them, if Earth's fight for survival could be the catalyst for change in the galaxy. And then came the unexpected. A message from Hyjin, the Zohari representative. She had been working behind the scenes to reach out to Jun Seok. She wanted to know if there was a way to resolve the conflict without more bloodshed. She had seen the courage of humanity, and she believed that there was a chance for peace after all. Her message was clear. She was willing to negotiate. But Jun Seok knew that negotiations weren't enough anymore. He had made it clear that humanity would not back down, but a part of him couldn't help but wonder if there was still hope for a peaceful resolution, or if the galaxy had already decided that Earth was to be an example for all who dared to defy them. As Jun Seok stood looking out over the battlefield, the future seemed uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity had made its mark on the galaxy. They had shown the galaxy that they would not be erased, they would not be controlled, that they would fight for their place in the stars. The fighting had been going on for weeks. Now, Earth's people were feeling the weight of the struggle. Every day there was news of a new skirmish, a new attack on Earth's defenses. And every night people held their breath, waiting for a message from the military. Some parts of the world were in chaos, with citizens rioting in protest. Others watching anxiously as the battle unfolded on the news. There were whispers in the streets, in homes, in offices, that humanity's future was being decided far beyond the sky, and that it was only a matter of time before the galaxy's power would break through. But despite all the uncertainty, one thing was clear: Earth had stood tall. Jun Seok spent his nights in the war room, analyzing reports from the front lines, giving instructions to military commanders, and answering questions from advisors. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of the world, but despite his exhaustion, he refused to let his resolve falter. There were moments, late at night, when everyone else had gone to sleep, when he allowed himself to think of home. He thought of his family, of the simple days before all this, before the fear and the pressure, when Earth was just another quiet planet. He missed the sounds of the busy streets, the laughter of children, the feeling of safety that now seemed so far away. He hadn't seen his wife or his children for months, and the thought of them kept him going. He had promised them a future. He had promised humanity a future. The Earth fleet had been holding its own against the Zohari ships. But it was clear that they couldn't keep this up forever. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and while the human spirit was strong, the reality of war was crushing. Military officials began whispering about a potential surrender, about negotiating with the council, about stopping the violence before it consumed everything. But Jun Seok couldn't accept that. He had already made the choice to stand up for humanity, and he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when the whole galaxy was watching. The air was thick with tension as Jun Seok stood at the window of the command center, staring out at the sprawling city below. The once thriving streets were now eerily quiet, the people holding their breath, unsure of what would come next. The sound of sirens in the distance was a constant reminder of the threat that loomed over their heads. The city, once so full of life, had become a battleground, but Junseok couldn't let that break him. Earth had made its stand, and he had to lead them through it. He couldn't afford to fail. Days passed, and the reports from the front lines continued to pour in. The Zohari were relentless, pushing deeper into Earth's defenses. Earth's ships were holding strong, but they were losing ground. The loss of a single ship felt like the loss of a piece of humanity's soul. Each battle was a reminder of just how fragile they were, just how much they were risking. But there was no turning back. Junseok knew that if Earth was to survive, if humanity was to have a place among the stars, they had to show the galaxy that they could endure, that they could fight. Then came the message. It arrived in the middle of the night. A transmission from Heijin, the Zohari representative. She had been one of the few who had tried to mediate, to understand humanity's refusal to submit. The message was brief but powerful. She was calling for a ceasefire. She wanted to meet, to negotiate, find a way out of this conflict without more bloodshed. Jun-Seok had expected many things, but not this. For weeks, the Zohari had been relentless, their attacks unyielding. And now, Haijin, who had once stood in the Galactic Council as a voice of reason, was offering a way out. He sat for a long time, staring at the message. It was tempting, so tempting to consider it. After all, who wanted more death? Who wanted to continue this endless struggle when there might be a chance for peace? But Junseok knew the truth. The Zohari hadn't changed, hadn't come to the table because they wanted peace. They were tired of fighting, but they still saw humanity as a threat to their control. The message wasn't an olive branch. It was a desperate attempt to regain control over a situation that had spiraled out of their hands. Still, Junseok knew he had to consider it. Earth's people couldn't be expected to fight forever. It had families to return to, dreams to chase, lives to live. The cost of the war was heavy, and every day more and more people were beginning to question whether it was worth it. Could humanity keep going like this? How much longer could they stand their ground before they ran out of resources? Before they ran out of time? He turned to Yoonji, who had been working beside him in the war room since the first wave of attacks. Her face was tired, her eyes drawn, but there was no doubt in her expression. She hadn't given up, not even once. What do you think? Junseok asked her quietly. Yoonji hesitated, then spoke, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. I think that piece is something worth pursuing. But I also think that if we do this now, we risk showing weakness. If we surrender now, even temporarily, the Council will think they've won. They'll think they can push humanity around any time they want. We can't give them that satisfaction. Junseok nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The decision wasn't simple, and no matter which way he went, it would change everything. If he refused the ceasefire, if he continued the fight, humanity could lose everything. But if he agreed, Earth might never be free again. The next morning, Junseok stood before the people of Earth once again. This time, the news wasn't about holding strong. It wasn't about defying the galaxy. This time, he had a decision to make. My fellow citizens, he began, his voice filled with resolve, we stand at a crossroads once again. We have fought for our survival. We have fought for our place among the stars. But the cost of this fight is great. The Council has offered a ceasefire, and I will not take this decision lightly. We have two choices before us. We can continue to fight, or we can take this opportunity for peace. The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Junseok felt the eyes of the world on him, felt the tension in every person who was listening to his speech. Earth had been through so much, and now he had to make the decision that would determine their future. Would they keep fighting, risking everything? Or would they lay down their weapons and risk being controlled forever? For a long moment, Junseok stood there, looking out at the faces of those who had supported him, those who had believed in him. The decision was never supposed to be this hard, but it was. It was the hardest choice he had ever had to make. Finally, he spoke, his voice clear and strong. We will not surrender. We will not bow, but we will negotiate. We will show the galaxy that we are not just warriors, but diplomats. We will prove that we are worthy of being treated as equals, not because we fight, but because we have the strength to stand tall in the face of adversity. We will take the opportunity for peace, but we will not allow anyone to dictate our future. The decision was made, and the negotiations began. The war didn't stop immediately, but the fighting slowed. The ceasefire was tentative, but it was a beginning. Humanity was no longer seen as the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy was beginning to realize it. Days turned into weeks, and as Jun Seok sat at the table with the representatives of the Galactic Council, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Earth had made its mark on the galaxy. They had proven that they would never be silenced. But as the talks continued, Jun Seok knew that the real battle wasn't just for Earth's survival. It was for the survival of their dignity, the right to stand on their own without fear of being controlled. The negotiations were long and hard. The Zohari were still unwilling to give up their superiority, still unwilling to accept that humanity had a right to be treated as an equal. But with each day that passed, Jun Seok felt the pressure begin to ease. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were becoming something more. They were becoming a force in the galaxy, not because they were the most powerful, but because they refused to let anyone take away their right to be free. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had made its mark. The galaxy would never see them as weak again. They had fought for their place in the stars, and no matter what came next, they would not be silenced. The negotiations had been long and exhausting. The room was heavy with silence as Jun Seok sat. Across from the delegates of the Galactic Council, his eyes were tired but resolute. He had spent days speaking with leaders and diplomats, trying to reach a deal that would allow Earth to maintain its independence. The pressure had been mounting. From all sides, the Zohari were still unwilling to give ground. Their arrogance was a constant reminder that the galaxy saw Earth is nothing more than a challenge to their authority. But as the days dragged on, Jun Seok began to sense something. Different in the air, the conversations were shifting slowly but surely. Something was changing. He had hoped that by standing firm, Earth would show the galaxy that they could not be easily controlled, but what he hadn't expected was how the rest of the galaxy would start to react as the talks continued. There was an unease growing among the representatives from the other species. There were whispers behind closed doors about the power of human resolve, about the unexpected strength that had emerged when Earth refused to back down. Jun Seok knew that it wasn't just Earth's military power that had won them a place at the table. It was something deeper. It was the fact that humanity had stood up when it would have been easier to stay quiet, the fact that they had fought against impossible odds without ever knowing if they would win. He had spoken to the people of Earth with a belief that they could hold their own against the galaxy, but he hadn't realized just how much the rest of the galaxy would be watching and listening. The Zohari were the most difficult to deal with. They were proud and fiercely protective of their standing in the galaxy. Every time the negotiations hit a deadlock, it was always because of the Zohari. Their representative Hajin had become a familiar figure across the table from Jun Seok. She was calm, poised, but there was a quiet tension in her gaze. She had been one of the first to recognize the strength of humanity, but even she was reluctant to accept Earth's independence. She would often argue for the greater good of the galaxy, the need for unity, for peace, but Jun Seok knew that peace at the expense of Earth's dignity wasn't something he could accept as. The days passed, the pressure began to wear on Jun Seok. He could feel the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him, and the long hours were beginning to take their toll. He hadn't seen his family in months. The time apart was wearing on him, but he refused to let that distraction interfere with his duty. He thought of his wife, his children, and how proud they would be if humanity emerged from this with its independence intact. But there was no guarantee of that. The talks had become a constant push and pull, Earth's resolve against the galaxy's power. But he had made a promise to his people, and he couldn't back down. The turning point came on a quiet evening when the Zohari finally proposed something that Jun Seok hadn't expected. They offered a compromise, not a full acceptance of Earth's independence, but a partial agreement that would allow Earth to maintain its sovereignty in exchange for certain conditions. The offer was a small victory, but it was a victory. Nonetheless, Jun Seok sat back in his chair and looked at the proposal. His heart raced as he scanned the terms. It wasn't everything that Earth had wanted, but it was far more than anyone had expected after weeks of tension. After months of fighting, the Zohari were beginning to relent. He looked up at Haijin across the table and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She had fought for the peace that she believed in, but now she was faced with the reality that Earth could no longer be ignored. Is this the best we can do? Jun Seok asked quietly. Haijin didn't answer immediately. She took a deep breath and looked at him with a mixture of respect and reluctance. It's the only way forward for now, she said after a long pause. The galaxy has been watching you. Earth's strength is undeniable, but the price for peace is always high. Jun Seok nodded slowly. He understood what she was saying. The galaxy wasn't ready to give Earth the kind of freedom it truly deserved, but this compromise was a step in the right direction. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He looked around the table at the other representatives, each of them silent, waiting for his response. He knew that the eyes of the galaxy were on him now. He had to make the decision. He had to decide whether to accept this agreement or continue to fight for something more. For a long moment, Jun Seok said nothing. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like an impossible burden. What would Earth's future look like if he accepted this? What would it mean for the generations to come? Would this be enough for them? Would they be able to say that they had truly won their place in the galaxy finally? Jun Seok spoke, his voice calm, but filled with resolve. I accept your proposal, he said, but I want it understood that this is only the beginning. Earth will not be satisfied with anything less than full independence one day, and we will continue to work toward that day. The room fell silent again, but this time there was a sense of quiet agreement. Even among the Zohari, Haijin gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, and the other representatives murmured in agreement. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a victory, and for the first time in months, Jun Seok felt a flicker of hope stir within him. He had done it. He had led Earth to the table and secured a place for humanity in the galaxy. But even as the negotiations came to a close, Jun Seok knew that the real battle was still ahead. The galaxy had not fully accepted Earth's independence, and the forces that wanted to keep humanity under control were still out there lurking in the shadows. But Earth had taken the first step toward a future where they could stand as equals among the stars, and that was something no one could ever take away back on Earth. The news of the agreement spread quickly. People cheered in the streets, waving flags, celebrating their hard-earned victory. But even in the midst of the celebration, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. Humanity had won a place at the table, but it was just the beginning. They still had a long road ahead of them before they could truly say that they were. Jun Seok stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Watching the lights flicker in the distance, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, but also a sense of pride. The people of Earth had stood together. They had refused to bow, and they had earned their place among the stars. He thought of his family, of his children, and the future they would inherit. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs, and that was enough for now. As the years went on, Earth would continue to fight for its full independence. The galaxy would continue to watch and wait, but no matter what happened, one thing was certain: Earth had proven that it would never again be a small, insignificant planet at the edge of the universe. It had shown the galaxy that humanity could stand tall, that they could fight, and that they could survive, and no matter what came next, Earth would never be silenced again.